Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is honestly the greatest, most epic detective story in all of human history. Seriously, it's not some true crime mystery we're talking about here. We are looking at the massive, ongoing human quest to decode and organize the entire web of life on Earth. I mean, how in the world do we make sense of the overwhelming biological chaos going on all around us? Well, let's grab our magnifying glasses and investigate.
To really get why this detective work is absolutely crucial, we first need to check out the clues nature leaves for us. You might wonder why certain plants and animals can survive endless droughts in a sun-baked desert. Well, let's be real, most of us would perish in a day out there. Every single lizard and cactus has adapted perfectly. They've got this incredible biological specialization to totally master such an extreme environment. And boy, does the plot thicken when we travel to the opposite extreme. Going from a baking desert to a freezing, snow-clad Arctic environment means the biological toolkit required to actually thrive is completely different. We're talking about polar bears and seals flourishing in a world of ice and freezing waters that honestly just seems entirely inhospitable to life as we know it. Now, shifting gears to the dry, diverse savanna, it's not just about surviving the harsh climate anymore, is it? It's about surviving each other. There is this incredibly complex web of connections out there. Predators, prey, scavengers, they're all relying on one another in a super delicate, high-stakes balancing act just to keep the whole ecosystem stable and functioning. And then we have the lush, thriving rainforests. Honestly, from microscopic, glowing jellyfish deep in the oceans to the giant trees and the animals swinging through their canopies, our planet is packed with an absolutely overwhelming variety of life forms. The sheer scale of it all is almost hard to wrap your head around. It's just massive. We call this immense variety, and the vital interconnections between all these organisms, biodiversity. So why does this actually matter to you and me? Well, microscopic algae floating in the oceans are out there right now, releasing most of the oxygen we breathe. Meanwhile, fungi are literally working overtime turning waste into fertile soil. Biodiversity is, without exaggeration, our planet's life support system. Which brings us right to the core mystery of our explainer today. With such vast, seemingly chaotic diversity spread across all these mountains, deserts, and oceans, how do we actually make sense of it all? If you're a scientist or just a really curious person, where do you even begin to catalog millions of interconnected species? This is the profound, giant puzzle that humans have been trying to solve for centuries. Believe it or not, some of our very first ecological detectives were ancient Indian farmers and scholars. Because they lived in a massive biodiversity hotspot, they had to deeply understand their surroundings just to survive. They developed something called the Sangam Tinai, which was a highly sophisticated ancient literary classification of landscapes and wildlife. By establishing sacred groves and breeding crops for things like drought tolerance and pest resistance, they figured out super early on that understanding and preserving local habitats was the ultimate insurance policy against collapse. Fast forward a bit, and we see this brilliant traditional knowledge merge right into formal science. The 17th century Hortus Malabaricus is this massive collaborative masterpiece between Hendrik von Wrede and an Indian botanist named Iti Achudan. Together, they systematically cataloged hundreds of plant species and their medicinal uses. It's a perfect early example of organizing nature to solve real-world problems. Taking this to a global scale, the attempt to build a universal filing system for life gives us two major historical heavyweights in our detective story. We have the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle and later the 18th century scientist Carl Linnaeus. Both of these brilliant minds recognized a fundamental truth. To make sense of the world, humans desperately need to group things into neat, understandable boxes based on their similarities. Let's track how their methods actually evolved over time. Aristotle started off pretty simply. He grouped animals based on where they lived, land, water, or air, and their basic external traits. A really solid start, but kind of limited. Then, by the 18th century, Linnaeus comes along and develops a much stricter system based on shared physical characteristics. This gave us the famous two-kingdom system, Plantae and Animalia. Plants and Animalia. Sounds nice, neat, and totally complete, right? But, oh man, here is the massive plot twist in our story. The invention of the microscope suddenly pulled back the curtain on a vast, completely invisible world teeming with bizarre microorganisms. Almost overnight, plants and animals just wasn't going to cut it anymore. We suddenly had millions of microscopic suspects that flat out refused to fit into those two neat little boxes.
The narrative of science is basically one of constant revision. When you look at the timeline of classification, you see that every single time we invent better technology, the plot expands. We went from Aristotle's habitats to Linnaeus's two kingdoms, all the way to Whitaker's five-kingdom system in the 20th century. And today, we use an even broader framework. Our filing system expands exactly as fast as our vision does.
That 20th century leap by Whitaker wasn't just random guesswork either. He used deep biological clues to categorize things: cellular structure, the number of cells, how an organism gets its nutrition, and its ecological role. For example, he realized that fungi decompose food in a completely different way than plants photosynthesize it. This careful, detective-level reasoning gave us 5 distinct kingdoms: Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia, providing the nuanced framework we absolutely need to manage ecosystems today. But hold on, because the story definitely doesn't stop there. In the modern era, we've realized microscopic life is so incredibly diverse that it rewrote the rules all over again, giving us the 3 domains of life. And here is the really mind-blowing takeaway. Complex life, like us humans, giant trees, and fungi, we all get crammed into just one single domain: eukarya. Meanwhile, bacteria and archaea are so biologically distinct from each other that they get the other 2 domains entirely to themselves. Wild, right?
And just to prove our scientific detectives are still out in the field finding new clues, consider the purple frog. This wonderfully bizarre creature was discovered as recently as 2003 in Kerala's Sahyadri Hills. It lives mostly underground, and honestly, it kind of looks like a gelatinous blob. When scientists stumble upon a wild new suspect like this, they have to meticulously compare its DNA and physical traits with known species just to figure out where it belongs on the family tree of life. So how do we figure out the lineage of something as strange as the purple frog? Well, we have to dig into the past. It turns out this frog belongs to a very ancient family, which we only know about because of fossils. Eminent scientists, like the pioneer Birbal spent their lives studying fossilized plants, proving that to classify the present day, we really have to understand Earth's deep, interconnected history. It's like putting together a giant puzzle where half the pieces are millions of years old. Which brings us to the core takeaway of our entire investigation. Biological classification is an ongoing process of reasoning and change. It's not some boring, static list of rules you just memorize from a textbook. It is a living, breathing history of human curiosity. Every time nature reveals new clues, we adapt our systems to make sense of it all. Which leaves us with this thrilling final thought. If a simple magnifying tool like the early microscope forced us to invent whole new kingdoms of life, what exactly happens next? As we send probes down into the deepest, darkest ocean trenches, or maybe even look to the ice of other planets, what completely unknown organisms are just waiting out there in the dark? And how will they force us to rewrite the rules of life all over again? The great detective story is far from over. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep your curiosity alive.